Thanks for tuning into the AWIP podcast. I'm your host, Rae Smith. If you know anything about AWIP International, you know that we focus on investigations and all animal welfare related topics. If you're watching this video, then you know that we post this up on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. And if you're interested in finding out more about AWIP and our mission, then make sure to check us out at awip.org.uk or at awipusa.org. Today's theme is going to be my vet bill is how much? So I think that is fair to say that has crossed almost every person's mind within the last couple of years here when you've taken your dog in. I know it's crossed mine. And so talking about access to vet care, it's like one of the topics I can wake up and talk about day in and day out. So here to walk us through this is the co-founder of Vet Billing. I'd like to bring on my guest for today, Suzanne Cannon. Hey, Suzanne. How are you doing?
Hey, good. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you for giving us your time. We were chatting leading up to this. I know actually for the past couple of months here and there about, this topic and all of that. I think it's really interesting to hear from your perspective, right? Because I know I've had Dr. G on, she's a vet, talking about access to care before. But I really like to get different perspectives from people. And so you're not a vet. And I think everything that you have to say in our conversations so far have been super, super enlightening to me. So I'm really, really excited about this episode. But Suzanne, before we get into it, can you walk us through your history and how you came to find vet billing?
Yes, it's a very circuitous journey that brought me here. My actual professional background, is in counseling. I have a master's degree in pastoral counseling. I did that for many, many years. Worked in hospitals and was a hospital and hospice chaplain and did individual one-on-one counseling and therapy. And sometimes when people hear pastoral counseling, they think that I was like maybe a religious type of counselor. And that's really not how it works. Pastoral kind of allows us to also include, if we want to, and if our client wants to, the spiritual aspect of themselves that many people bring with them. Whereas sort of traditional counseling kind of asks you to check that at the door. It's not an area that's typically explored. So we were free to explore that with people, and whether that spirituality took the form of their religious beliefs or just spiritual beliefs, we were free to include that as an additional resource. And the word pastor really just means shepherd or guide, or someone that kind of companions with. So there wasn't anything particularly religious about it. People would say, "Oh, did you discuss the Ten Commandments with people?" Or, and I said, no. I mean, there were some people I work with that came from a super strong vacation Bible school background, and they might want to talk about those kind of things. And we could bring those tools in if that brought a lot of meaning. So anyway, the transition was not something I foresaw at all, ever. However, all through my life, I've had animals, dogs and horses. And I seem to attract animals that get chronic medical problems. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they kind of know I'm going to stick with them and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that they can live the best life possible. So I've had diabetic dog. I've had horses with chronic issues. The horse that I have right now has Cushing's disease, or it's better known as PPID now, pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction. It's kind of a metabolic disorder. He's got some respiratory issues. He's older too. He's in his 20s. So he has to be carefully managed. And my schnauzer that I have now became suddenly paralyzed a couple of years ago from a FCE, or kind of a shorthand way to describe that as like a spinal stroke. And so he lost his mobility. He lost his ability to use his bladder on his own. So he has to express his bladder. So as a pet owner, I had multiple interactions with my vets. I would joke sometimes with some of them, like, do you guys just have an apartment I can move in and stay here? So I had sort of really a front row seat to being with my vets all the time. And also because I work with equine vets for my horse, that's a very different kind of model of veterinary medicine than small animal medicine.
Mm.
It's kind of in my case, because in my area, we have mostly um, ambulatory vets. They're in practice for themselves. There's not like a big brick and mortar vet hospital that we
Okay.
go to. I mean, we can, but usually you're only going to trailer your horse to something like that if you need to see a surgeon or you need a surgical consult or something, really serious. But most of the stuff takes place on the farm, and you really get to know your vet. You also have to learn how to do a lot of things on your own because you can't call your vet out to your farm every time you have an issue. So you learn how to give injections, you learn how to do all sorts of treatments and soaking feet and wrapping wounds and things like this. So what I learned from that, one of the differences that I saw was when it came to paying for care, the model that a lot of equine vets still use, especially ones that travel around and they're by themselves, is still probably 20 years behind small animal general practice vets in terms of billing. So usually the vet comes out, you don't typically pay at the point of service at the farm. Some
Mm.
vets are doing that now. It's starting to shift, but more still bill you after the fact. So you're sent a bill, and they're kind of used to having accounts receivable. And unfortunately, they tend to carry a whole lot of accounts receivable. And that's a bit of a problem, but they've always been a lot more flexible about understanding if clients have a financial limitation, if they're facing, a particularly costly thing like a lameness exam. It just keeps kind of going on and on because you can't exactly identify the problem and your
Mm-hmm.
your bill keeps running up. So on the one hand, they've been at a disadvantage because of AR. On the other hand, it makes it easier for those of us that are the owner to manage it. And especially if there are those of us like me who want to be very conscientious about making sure my vet gets paid. So the first time this conversation came up with my equine vet was one year when I had two horses get injured pretty significantly. They were both older, and all sorts of things kept going wrong, like secondary infections. And, anyways, it was just money after money after money. And I also happened to be going through a divorce at that time. She knew all of that. And she came out one morning after something else had gone wrong, and she said, I can't believe this is happening to you. She was very empathic. And um, I said, so what, I owe you around $2,000 now. And I said, how do you feel if I set up monthly recurring payments for you from my bank account, that I send you $100 a month for right now? And as I get back on my feet recovering from the divorce, I can increase it, or I'll just pay off my balance. And she hesitated for a moment, and I thought, oh no, I said the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And instead she said, of course. She said, of course you can do that. She said, do you know how many people don't pay me at all? And this was news to me. Like, it never occurred to me to not pay my vet or not try to pay or not bring this up. Or,
Yeah.
if I thought there was going to be a hardship for me. And I said, no. I said, I didn't know that. And she said, I would be happy if some people sent me $5 a month because I know that they're trying to pay me. And
Yeah.
she said, instead, they just kind of let their balance build up, but they're still going to call me at 2 a.m. on Saturday because their horse is colicking, and I'm going to go because that's what I do. So that was sort of my first introduction into the dilemma that vets find themselves in, and that, she very clearly didn't go into this to be discussing money. She wants to be treating horses
Mm-hmm.
and helping their owners. So that sort of turned a light bulb on in my head. And then I had a subsequent conversation with one of my close friends who also used the same vet. And I told her that I discussed with Rachel was my vet's name, that I was going to set up monthly recurring payments for her. And my friend, who is actually a very smart businesswoman, she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh." She said, "Do you know what I do with Rachel's bill every month when I get it?" She had like a $400 or $500 balance. And she said, "I just shuffle it to the bottom of my stack because I don't have $500 right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if I knew she took payments, I would have been paying her." And
Mm-hmm.
I thought, that made me think about the psychology of money there. Because she was getting that bill every month and she was seeing this huge number that she was like, I just don't have that right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess sometimes people just don't think outside the box enough to go, oh, well, I don't have this now, but I'm going to send her $100 or
Yeah.
whatever I have. And that was sort of the beginning of me thinking about this model of payments for vets. And then, of course, the very same year that I had those issues with my horses, I had emergency vet bills for my dog, got pancreatitis, and went to the emergency vet. And I'm still in this ridiculously challenging situation of being in a divorce, situation and having to move back in with my mother. It was terrible. My life just completely sort of changed.
Yeah.
Whereas months before, money wouldn't have been an issue for me. Now it really was. So I had a $4,000 vet bill for the pancreatitis situation, and I had pet insurance. So this was another thing that really informed how vet billing came to be. And I'm sorry, I'm like doing this way like roundabout explanation, giving you the whole context, but this was all really important to how vet billing eventually came to be. So I had pet insurance. I had had pet insurance since the mid 90s. There was only one insurance company then. It was VPI. And there what Trupanion didn't even exist yet. They started a
Mm-hmm.
couple years later. And people laughed at me when I got pet insurance. They did, because they didn't know about it. And they're like, well, what do you need that for? I said, well, if you have schnauzers and they get bladder stones, you know, you might want to have this. And I had been through that before as well. But what I discovered in that moment, and I hadn't really thought about it until then, is that I couldn't rely on the pet insurance to help me get through that need for $4,000 immediately.
Mm-hmm.
That I had to come up with that $4,000 and submit a claim. And then at that time, reimbursement payback periods were really long, like 8 to 10 weeks. And so I was standing there and just sort of flabbergasted and suddenly realizing, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And the receptionist was very sensitive to my concerns. And she said, oh, don't worry. She said, we have this financing option called Care Credit. She said, just apply for that and everything should be fine. So I was so relieved. I felt like my knees were going to buckle out of relief. I'm like, oh, this is great and whatever. So I fill out the application. And this was long enough ago that you handed the application to the vet and they ran it through. You didn't do it yourself or anything. And so she goes to the back and you're sort of waiting, like, what's the answer going to be? And she comes back and she said, I'm so sorry, but you were declined. So besides my panic and my fear, now I felt humiliated. Now
Yeah.
I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I didn't know why in the world I would have been declined. I briefly said to myself, well, what do I have bad debt? I mean, I couldn't even think clearly at that
Mm-hmm.
moment. So now I'm in this situation where what am I doing? My dog is only 8. She's treatable. Will be fine with treatment. And of course, like many owners do, I asked about payment plans. I said, I can definitely make payments. I'm not sure why I was declined. And then I immediately got that spiel of the defensiveness and, oh, well, we don't do payment plans. That's just not something we can do because if we gave payment plans to everyone, no one would pay and we would go out of business and we won't be here for your pet and all of that. And I said, well, if I can't pay you the $4,000 right away, then what happens? And she said, well, we'll send you to collections. And that sounded very scary to me.
Yeah.
So, how did I get out of that? My mom. And my mom loaned me the $4,000 and I paid her back over a period of years because it took,
Hmm.
of course, a lot longer to get back on my feet than I had anticipated it would. But I
Hmm.
remember leaving the vet hospital at that point and thinking to myself, what do you do if you don't have a mom to turn to? You have
Hmm.
no other family member that has thousands of dollars, or a friend. What do you do?
Yeah.
Then that's euthanasia or that's a surrender. And in going through a divorce, my dogs are what really kept me together to survive that very difficult time. So to imagine not having them, that was incomprehensible to think like I can't have my pets because I'm going through a bad time in a financially challenging season in my life. Like it wasn't like that before, and I didn't anticipate it would be like this in the future. But at the moment, I was cycling through sort of situational poverty in terms of a
Mhm.
vet bill. And that planted the seeds for what became vet billing. Many years after the fact, when I met my current life and business partner, who just happened to have been running a professional accounts receivable management company for close to 30 years at that point. And I looked at that model and I said, I wonder if we could take this to vet med and it could be an alternative for people that don't qualify for care credit. So that is how it started. And I had no idea what I was getting into or how hard this would be. If I did, I wouldn't have tried. So ignorance is bliss in that sense. Um, I had enough idealism and passion to move forward with it, even though I was scared. And here we are 10 years later, and I would say we're still on an uphill climb. It's we're a lot more known now, and bringing on a lot more clinics because I think the whole access to care conversation, we were sort of ahead of the curve of that.
Hmm.
Um, and after the Access to Veterinary Care Coalition report was published in 2018, that's when we sort of saw things begin to shift more in favor of looking at alternative ways for people to pay for care. And then also post pandemic, the pandemic shifted a lot of things. And so
Everything.
it's been in the wake of that we've really grown. So that's my really long answer to how I got here. But it was a really genuine, thoughtful journey that took me by surprise. Never would have thought I would be doing this.
I mean, I'm literally sitting on the edge of my seat because this story is it's so compelling because like what you're saying, what you're explaining, your experience of getting into this is what hundreds of thousands of people are going through at this point in time. I mean, there's so much that
Mm-hmm.
goes into access to vet care, and I mean to hear from people because I think that there are still at times this kind of stigma where it's like, well, if you can't take care of your pet and you can't take care of your vet bills, you're just some freeloading bum and you don't
Right.
do anything, and it's not, it really is not the case, and I know from my perspective that's not the case a lot of times either. And I have my own personal stories with actually both of my dogs too, in a similar situation where it's like, how am I going to be able to afford this? How am I going to be able to give them the care that they need, right? They're completely dependent on you, and it makes you feel like a failure and like a
Mm-hmm.
bad parent. And if you can't pay for those things, so I think and you hit on this, the consequences of not being able to afford this veterinary care. People end up delaying care, which at times will lead to animal neglect situations. Their condition
Mm-hmm.
worsens, the bill becomes more expensive. Sometimes animal control gets involved
Mm-hmm.
with bad cases. People have to have that decision. Do I end up euthanizing my dog or my cat or my animal? Do I have to surrender them to the shelter? I know, with one of my dogs, that was the decision that I was facing, years ago. And I mean, these are some of the consequences that are bred from just not being able to afford or have access to affordable veterinary care. So, um, Suzanne, I guess, my question is, from your perspective, why in the hell has veterinary care risen so much? I mean, I think the data that I had read, there was something that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So just so you know, whoever's listening to this, I'm not just pulling stuff out of my ass here. The Bureau of Labor Statistics came out from February of 2023 to February of 2024 that the cost of vet care in general across the board had risen 7.9%, so almost 8% increase, and that it had gone up 60% in the last decade and was still projected to rise, I think something like 30%, they said. I mean, it's it's so far beyond inflation. It just seems like so unfair at times. Like, I've got my theories. I've heard from vets saying, that their cost of school has, increased, medications, treatments, all of these kinds of things has gone up. What do you think, Suzanne? Why has it gone up this much?
There's, like you've been hearing from veterinarians that you've talked to, and we've been reading in the press, because this has been getting more attention outside of those of us that are cloistered in vet med and animal welfare, because it's been written about now by the New York Times, had an article that got a lot of attention. The Atlantic had a very good article back in April called "Why is my vet bill so high?" That's sort of kind of the flagship article, I think, if people want to look at the various factors impacting the cost of veterinary care. That's the best article, I think. It's multifactorial. We can't boil it down to one thing or another. And I know that sometimes pet owners, vets get a bad rap from pet owners too,
Mhm.
saying,
Yeah.
oh, you're just greedy and you just want money. And I think more of that comes from the fact that they don't realize financing options are available. Sometimes they're seeing that full price thing and being in a position like, oh, I have to pay this all at once. And many people just can't. And those policies are often so rigid that adds to the wrong perception that vets are only in it for the money.
Right.
So that's an erroneous assumption. But yes, it's true that because of in the wake of the pandemic, prices went up. The prices of supplies and medications and labs went up. So vets have higher costs. They're going to have to pass those on to their clients. Consolidation in the veterinary industry, private equity backed roll ups of independent vet clinics now becoming part of bigger groups, driving up prices. And the people that are buying up the clinics aren't necessarily veterinarians. So they're not in it really to increase access to care. They're in it to make a profit and hopefully get in and then sell and make a lot of money. And I think the pandemic wrongly led to the belief that there's going to be a constant inelasticity of demand for veterinary care,
Hmm.
because suddenly everybody was booked and was curbside and people got more pets. And I sat there and I looked at those trends and I knew that they were completely the opposite of the trends that we've been seeing for like a decade in vet med before, which was declining number of new client visits, flat to declining existing client visits. Revenues were trending down. And then all of a sudden that all switched. And I think it was like Fat City for everybody. It kind of made everyone think, well, we're in a new era. And I just kind of sat there and watched it and went, I don't know. Maybe we are, but I just don't understand how this flipped like this and it's sustainable. And
Yeah.
it wasn't. So now we're seeing a return back to those trends. But You also mentioned the cost of vet school. Yes, that's another thing that has made vets have to focus more on the reality of what are they earning. Because
Hmm.
compared to other professionals with the equivalent amount of education and experience, they don't make very much money. And I do think a lot of pet owners assume that they're kind of rolling in it. Now, maybe if you're a practice owner and you've been a practice owner for a while and your school debts are behind you or whatever, you can be making a nice, healthy living. But a lot of associate vets are not.
Right.
Vet techs are not for
Right.
sure. But that is a problem. I mean, that's a problem that the system needs to address. Like, we have a lot of systemic issues in vet med that are creating this problem. It's not individual vets, it's the system that they're working in.
Right.
Um, and it's also that prevailing narrative about the payment model. The payment model of paying in full all at one time is really a legacy that needs to be gone. It's no longer appropriate for the times that we live in, with the economy, with the way people are used to making payments for so many other things, um, how much people need to manage their cash flow. And by sticking to those policies, we're forcing people, we're pricing people out of care when they
Hmm.
need it. But I mean, it's so many things. Even lab costs. There's been consolidation among labs too.
Hmm.
So now there's very few labs, for vets to choose to partner with, and they sign really long-term contracts, and I don't necessarily know how to optimize those contracts. So they need to get in touch with my friend and colleague Rachel Lemke from Amwell Data Services. I'll give her a plug here. She can really help vets save a lot of money by doing that detail work for them and helping them to get better contracts and pricing to help them with access to care. Because if their prices are lower, and their clients' prices are lower. So I know I've just probably missed a number of things, but it's not any one thing. And we're just in this place right now where I don't see prices going back, just like so many things in the wake of the pandemic. Prices have risen in the wake of inflation. And even though we keep hearing reports that inflation has cooled significantly, I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing it at the grocery store. I'm not seeing it at the gas station. And I
Mm-mm.
think it's kind of like, well, once the market has been forced to bear paying these higher prices, who's going to roll it back? I mean,
Right.
even if it's causing discomfort for people. So, I don't know what we do about that, but the same thing with vet med. Are you gonna roll your prices back? I have seen some of our clinic partners do that though, based on feedback from their clients, which I thought was enormously sensitive and wonderful of them to do. And obviously they must have had the capacity to do it, and they did reduce prices on some things, um, and greater adoption of financing options. So if prices are not going to go back down, then the need to look at ways to help people find alternative options to pay is essential. Like, we have to do that.
100%. So, for people who are listening, I want to go through some stats to better kind of explain and show from a statistical standpoint why this problem is so huge and so prolific right now. So, Hills actually did a really good job. They came out with the 2024 State of the Shelter Adoption Pet Adoption Report this year, I think back in June, July, August, somewhere around there. So what they ended up doing was polling about 2,500 people across the country from different backgrounds, socioeconomics, gender, age, all of that, to figure out. They asked them a whole list of questions, and some of it pertained to veterinary care, but it was about other stuff. But for the purpose of this, because we're focused on vet care, we're going to talk about that. So here's some of the things, and shout out, by the way, to Hills. They did a really amazing job. And if you haven't read the report, I highly recommend that you do. It's about 30 pages long, but the way that they wrote this out was fantastic. You'll fly through it. It's really, really great. So good job to them. All right. So some of the stats here. 84% of the general population said that the most expensive part of pet care
Mm,
was veterinary care, and that 63% of the general population said that the cost of vet care impacted their decision to adopt, and 49% of the general population said that the decision not to adopt was due to the lack of preventative, sick, or urgent care vet visits, especially if those people were making less than $100,000, which by vast majority is the majority of Americans.
Right.
And so when they looked at this more in depth, they said that 42% of people were impacted by the proximity of vet offices, especially if they were making less than $75,000. And 39% of people were impacted by the availability of reliable transit to vet offices, especially if they were
Mhm.
making less than $50,000. So, for that chunk of the Hills report, to me was kind of, I mean, I wouldn't, to me, just because I'm in the industry, wasn't really that shocking, but it was validating
Yes.
to actually have those statistics out there from this really great poll, because this is, I will tell you, in my experience working in the field, is exactly what we're seeing. The people just generally not being able to afford vet care, saying that they chose not to adopt because they didn't have access to urgent care vets,
Hmm.
anything, if their pet gets sick, injured, preventative visits, if they're making less than $100,000. I mean, it's part of the exacerbating reason, I think, behind why people don't end up adopting dogs, or I mean, they have literally
Hmm.
gone into that report and said, I am not going to get any more animals after this, or I can't afford to adopt another dog. Um, I'll say that from my perspective. I would love to have a third dog. Personally, I can't do it. I cannot do it with the vet bills that my pug has. I mean, we're there every other month, I swear to God. It
Yeah.
was too expensive. We can't afford it. Did any of those statistics sound shocking to you when you saw those, Suzanne?
Um, yes and no, like you, because I'm in this. It was more sort of validating of anecdotal evidence that I have to put seeing this actually in a study, and also the Lending Tree Pet Debt report that came out a few months ago this year. Um, that's where they had some stats in that shocked me, which was 39% of pet owners say they will not own a pet again in the future. That
Hmm.
does not bode well for veterinary medicine. It also does not bode well for shelters that
Hmm.
are already overcrowded. So again, we have this kind of vicious circle, happening. So that 39%, I mean that gave me pause. It did say, like, because like you, I've thought about that too. Like, when I brought home my miniature schnauzer Finch, who is now paralyzed, this precious little 8-week old puppy, um, you cannot foresee the future. You do not know what you're signing up for. You're full of love and the willingness to provide whatever care that they need, and it's just like sort of having a baby. You're thinking of the joy and the good times about having a kid or having your puppy, watching them grow and things like that. You're not thinking about the potential tragedies that can happen. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean, that's not like permission for people to not consider that they have to be financially prepared. But there's only so much you can do. Holding that 8-week old puppy, how in the world, it was totally off my radar to think that at the age of 5 he would be completely paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like, you know even with all of what I know from having worked so closely with vets for 10 years now and with vet billing, I mean, I know of these paralysis happening with long backed dogs, corgis and dachshunds and IVDD and things like that. FCE, I didn't really know about that. I also
Hmm.
didn't know it could be a thing in schnauzers. It was just totally shocking. And within 12 hours of that paralysis, we had spent $14,000. Now that is 100% cost prohibitive for a
Mhm.
lot of people. That was extremely hard and painful and difficult for us. We had enough credit. We had enough of a credit line to do that. We had family and friends that helped us as well, because they knew it was just once you're in that, you're sort of like sucked into a vortex of
Mhm.
your our main concern was what is wrong with our dog, like what is happening, what do we need to do. You're in full panic mode. Your brain doesn't have the space to also think about the money part of it.
Right.
um and you're seeing these estimates and your eyes are glazing over and you love that animal. You don't want to say goodbye. You
Right.
know, he's 5 years old. He was the most active, agile, full of life little dog.
Mhm.
And we were just heartbroken. Of course, we want him to stay with us. If he was 12, 13, or 14 and this happened, that might have been a different set of
Right.
decisions that we had to make. But here we are with this. Now, having had an experience like that, is going to make me worry about the possibility of something like that happening again, even though the chances are probably very low,
Mhm.
if I have another animal. But, you know, will I, what's going to happen if I'm facing something like that in the future? Can I afford to take that risk for myself? And it's
Mhm.
given me pause to think about whether I can continue having an animal in my life. And let me tell you, that is the most depressing thought ever.
Yeah.
That that kills me. It makes me sad, and it also makes me angry
Yeah.
that we're looking at a future that I fear pet ownership is going to be limited to the affluent. And what are we going to do? Means test everybody that wants a pet? What are we going
Right.
to do with all these animals that are sitting in shelters and need to find a home, who probably were there to begin with in many cases because someone couldn't afford their vet bill, you
Mhm.
know, or couldn't afford something. And
Mhm.
who's to say that the next adoptive family won't face the same sort of thing? And
Right.
then what are they going to do? Are we going to
Yeah.
just keep shunting these animals all around? I mean, to me, I think this problem has a tremendous sense of urgency around it. And sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that feels urgently about it.
Oh,
Like,
well, no, no, no. There are, I think there are a lot of people who feel the same. I mean, everybody's being impacted by this. Pet owners, vets, clinics. I mean, eventually, there's going to be this squeeze on the corporations, who have taken over a lot of this. And I know we'll get into it. um, I very much empathize with you and with so many people going through this. I will just very briefly. So, we had found out a couple years ago that my pug Maggie had epilepsy. She wasn't on medication because she wasn't having seizures very often. It was once a year. But there was a night where she went into something called status epilepticus. And if,
ugh,
for those who don't know, there's two different definitions, but the one that happened with her is that if you have a continuous seizure for over 5 minutes, from the time she started seizing until the time she came out of it was half an hour, nonstop. This wasn't come in, come out. It was a nonstop.
ugh.
So, of course, it happens in the middle of the night when I'm supposed to
Mm-hmm.
work the next day. And, I'm fortunate enough where I have a car, I have a vet clinic, a VCA emergency clinic 10 minutes down the road. So we rush her over there in the middle of the night. And between the the intake emergency exam, and then we ended up doing blood work, they said that will be $700, please. um, which I mean, to me, it's not the most expensive vet bill I've had, but it's shocking that it's just those two things, like blood work
Mm-hmm.
and an intake exam, is $700. And they had suggested doing an MRI, and I I was like, there's no way I can afford $5,000. I don't have $5,000. I can't give that to you. So they gave me, they decided she needed to start going on anti-seizure medication. She got Keppra. That was $70 right there. So, almost $800, one visit, one night. It was crazy. I mean, it was just crazy. But then I thought about this later on. What if I didn't have a car? What if I
Yeah.
couldn't afford that vet bill? What if I didn't even know that there was an emergency clinic? I mean, what would have happened? I mean,
Mhm.
that's a very, very, very serious condition you have to go to immediately. I mean, it's horrible enough to watch something like that because seizures are scary. But
Yes.
I mean, it was bad. Um, and I think about all the people who are going through things like this on a daily basis and they're so torn. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I'll be totally honest, like, speaking from the heart, to be in a position where if I couldn't afford it, say, well, we have to euthanize her or we need to surrender her to shelter if she survives now because I know that this isn't going to end. Now she has to be on medication for the rest of her life. Can you afford the medication? And I want to relate it back to the last part of the data that I had taken from Hills was that 37% of people said that they were more likely to adopt a pet with known health issues or a
Mhm.
senior
Mhm.
pet
Mhm.
if they had access to post adoption vet care support.
Yes.
39% of people said that they were more likely to adopt a pet even if they didn't have any known history if they had access to post adoption vet care support. And 25% of people said that access to affordable or free vet services would have prevented them from surrendering a pet. And 20% said that financial support for medical issues was on the top of their radar for things that they wanted to see after adopting. So
Mhm.
this is what people want. This is what people are crying out for. We know that people across the country are asking shelters to do more, provide more services. And I mean, it all boils down to money. They
Yes.
can't afford it. The shelters can't afford it. I think I mean that those part of the stats right there, I think were more eye opening to me, saying all nearly 40% of people would be more likely to adopt if shelters offered post
Mhm.
adoption vet care support. That to
Mhm.
me was surprising. That to me was something that we can key into if we are, as we are, in this overpopulation issue with shelters where we can't adopt these dogs out, especially large dogs who are there for an extremely long period of time. This is what I mean this to me is gold. These stats are gold right here.
Yes.
If you want to push these animals out, get them into good homes so people can care, this is what they want. 40%.
Yes. Yeah, it's stunning and it's like right in our faces, right? It's right in our faces. So I had two thoughts when you were talking. One other one is, you were saying shelters can't afford these costs, the veterinary costs of caring for animals that come to them with chronic medical issues, etc. Not only that, insurance companies can't afford the cost, which is why we saw nationwide dropping $100,000, 100,000 policy holders policies in June, um, or they're not going to renew them. And now all of these people who have animals that have pre-existing conditions are not able to get coverage anywhere. Okay, and what reason does Nationwide cite for this action that they're taking, which to me um, sort of breaks confidence in all pet insurance? The fact that you can just not renew people, okay? Um, but these people, they don't have anywhere to turn. They're told, well, they can't go to a different policy. They're just
Mhm.
dropped, and they're now not going to be able to get care anywhere. So what are what are they doing? And again, not a perfect model because they were still paying up front, but you were at least getting some of your money back.
Mm-hmm.
and they feel completely abandoned. So in nationwide sighting, the reason we're doing this is the rising cost of vet care. That's what they said. So,
Mm-hmm.
forget about whatever they might have done wrong in their actuarial modeling or whatever when they originally created this whole pet with wellness policy, which is the one that so many people were dropped from. But when the insurers are saying the cost of care is too high for them, and the other ones that we have are not profitable, which a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't even realize. I don't think Trupanion has ever been profitable. Um, this is an enormous problem, and it's like the red lights are flashing. And I posted that lending tree pet debt report on LinkedIn when it came out with some of my own commentary, and I said on that, hey, I hate to be an alarmist, but I'm alarmed.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the other frustrating thing. We have known this. Pet owners have been telling their vets this for, let's see, so I got into this. We launched vet billing in 2013. At that time, some of the initial research I did included the 2011 Bear Veterinary Care Usage Study. That study in 2011, pet owners were giving the feedback that costs are too high. We really would like to be able to pay monthly for things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was impacting their trust level with their vets. Okay, so we've known this since 2011. So maybe the only response from vet med was, oh, they want monthly payments. Let's give them wellness plans. Okay, wellness plans. I'm sorry. Wellness, I mean, routine and preventive care is a lot more predictable. So people can plan for that. It's things like suddenly your pet has a seizure for the first time, and they're 5 years old. Now they're having a seizure. And then after that seizure, they go into status epilepticus, or like my dog is suddenly paralyzed, or your dog is hit by a car, or your dog needs an emergency splenectomy, or your dog ingested a foreign object, which is very common.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, foreign body removal surgeries in emergency settings are averaging around $8,000 to $10,000 now. I mean, this is mind-boggling to me, and yet we've known it and we've let it get to this point. How have we allowed this to happen when the feedback has been for 10 years, more than 10 years, 13 years? um, Hey, we're kind of dying out here. We pet owners, like, we want some better options. We really want to be able to afford to be able to responsibly care for our animals, and we're struggling to do it. And so to me, it's like, what are we waiting for doing? I think we need to look at very different models for the delivery of veterinary care in the United States now. I think we need to move more away from the fee for service model and
Mm-hmm.
look at membership based models. There is a veterinary clinic in the UK called Garden Vets at Kiel. Garden Vets has a unique concept where pet owners pay there's different price tiers for a subscription model, and they're all reasonable. When I knew they were about to open this concept a couple of years ago, I wondered, I'm like, how are they going to do this and also make it affordable? But they did. That monthly fee that their pet owners pay includes everything, including emergency surgeries, medications. It's not just wellness. It's not just preventive care with a couple of additional sick visits that you get per year.
Mm-hmm.
It covers everything. Can you imagine the peace of mind you have walking in and knowing I'm not going to get clobbered with a $14,000 bill? Like, my animal can get treated, and everyone feels better. It's not just the pet owner,
Yeah.
it's the whole veterinary team. Everyone feels better. We have a model like that. We're going to eliminate so much of the moral distress that our veterinarians feel and practice every single day. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't go into this to euthanize treatable animals or
Right.
to ask owners to surrender a treatable animal. But I think what they have had to do over the years is sort of become calloused to this, or they wouldn't survive. They
Yeah.
have to twist themselves into a pretzel to justify why these are necessary solutions to the affordability crisis. And yet, what we really need to be thinking is that killing a treatable animal is not justifiable. It is not a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
It's impacting a family and that animal. We should look at it as much of a perversion as it would be if we took our kid had to go to the emergency room, our human kid,
Hmm.
and we were asked to pay in full for their treatment. And if we couldn't do that, then that kid has to go live with another family, or we're going to
Hmm.
put them down.
Yep.
I don't see
Perfect
the
point.
difference.
Perfect point. I did pull some stats from the lending tree report. In regards to people going into debt. So for the
Mm-hmm.
people that they polled, that said 37% of owners have gone into debt for their pets, and 68% of those said that it was due to a medical emergency. And because medical emergencies are so common, 64% of them said that they had an unexpected medical expense for their pet, and that only 27% of those people had pet insurance. And, I know you talked a little bit about them, but that, I mean, Suzanne, I'm so happy you brought that up because, um, you know, you could say what you want about, our human medical system, but you go in and you go get care, and you don't just walk in and say, oh, I broke my arm, here you have to pay $15,000 up front or you can leave. I mean, the model doesn't work. And I
It
do
doesn't.
actually, I have this question because I saw something that was coming out of Queens. I think that I think it's spreading more. It's something that I've been asking each of our guests on here. So, what do you think about city governments or county governments, whichever, adopting subsidization for veterinary care, spay neuter initiatives, things like that? Do you think that cities and counties subsidizing care, at least up to a point, would help people in these situations? Is that a good or bad idea?
I'd have to like go away and think about that. The way that our government manages to screw so many things up, I wonder about the effectiveness of it. We certainly need initiatives that help with spay neuter. But again, where I think our main challenge is acute care, sick care, injuries, and things like that. Those are the situations that end up rupturing families, like where people are having to say goodbye too soon to their pets.
Hmm.
um, Anything is going to help. I mean, you hate to like have to resort to legislation
Hmm.
or something in order to address the cost issue, especially because when privately in the private sector, this is my belief too, we have the resources to fix this problem. It's just that we're not directing them in the right way. And I don't understand that. There is so much money out there, and I'm going to call out Snoop Dogg on this, even though I kind of like Snoop Dogg. I like him on The Voice this year. But, Snoop Dogg and Rachel Ray and Martha Stewart, they've come out with their own lines of like cat litter and cat food and dog food. And Snoop Dogg's come out with like gangsta fashion for dogs. And I think about all the money that is going into that could instead go to funding access to care initiatives, to
Hmm.
subsidizing care. Like the way we direct the flow of resources in this country is insane. The
Hmm.
money is there, but we're choosing not to go there. And then we want to say to the government, well, you fund this, you create the initiatives. And then people are going to complain, well, my taxes are higher and, blah, blah, blah. How do we get the word out to some of these people that have tons of money that must be pet lovers
Hmm.
and say, what are we going to do with that money? Do you let's help people afford their veterinary care. Or
Yeah.
how about this? let's create universalized charitable funding for veterinary care. Charitable funding is so splintered and fragmented that if people want to apply for it, it's a super slow process. They can't get immediate funding in an emergency. There's at least a 24 to 48 hour window for approval. It's means tested and all that. And each individual charity only awards an average of $500 to a pet owner. Maximum usually is about a $2,000 gift. That means that with prices what they are today, looking at a foreign body removal of $8,000, that pet owner has to go to multiple charities and try to apply for funding, or they have to do crowdfunding. None of these things work well enough because time is of the essence. And they're doing separate applications to every single one of these organizations. That is ridiculous. Why doesn't PetSmart Charities create a one universal application where people can apply, like low income people that really truly would qualify for charitable funding? I see too much of our charitable funding going to pet owners who actually can pay, but they can't pay that full out-of-pocket amount up front. That's it. They don't need a full grant. They just need time to be able to pay. So like, why are we doing that? I mean, there's a brilliant woman named Nicole Patrick who started an organization called Rescue Spot. Are you familiar with Rescue Spot?
I don't think so, no.
So she created a universal application for adoption, so people don't have to apply to all sorts of different shelters. And it was a model that I reached out to her because I'm like, wow, if I had the brains, the time, and the money, I'd want to create veterinary charity using the same sort of model where it's connecting all of these smaller charities and bringing them together. So subsidies, are necessary, but gosh, I really like to think that our private sector could step up before we have to ask the government to get involved and do probably a not good enough job.
Well, I know. I just read that there is a bill in Congress they're trying to push through that would allow people who have an HSA or an FSA to use like up to $1,000 or something for vet bills for their dogs. Which, I mean, on one hand, I think is great because I think if you have something little that you need to do, like you should be able to do it. But at the same time, like you mentioned, like in the vet world, in vet care, $1,000 really isn't a lot. Like you go in to get 6 months of heartworm prevention, a couple of vaccines, maybe you do some blood work, and then the exam cost, boom, there's your 1,000 right there for the whole year. And that's hopefully nothing else happens to your dog.
Yes.
So I know, Suzanne, that you talked to me about this a while ago, but I think that part of understanding the exorbitant rise in costs of vet care has to do at least partially with large corporations who are buying up these clinics. I don't know a whole lot about that. Can you explain how that contributes to the rising cost of vet care?
I'm not by no means an expert in understanding like the accounting part of this, but my basic understanding of private equity getting involved in veterinary care is that it's traditionally been seen as like a recession resistant type of business. I think what we have learned is it is very much not the case. But they're like, oh, look at pet spending as a category. Pet spending has ballooned, but that includes multiple sectors. It's not just veterinary care. It's pet food, it's toys, it's grooming and supplies, and boarding and what have you. There's a guy that writes a monthly petflation report. His name is John Gibbons. I recommend that people look that up. I think his website is the Pet Business Professor. So he looks at inflation and all of those different categories of pet spending. But so I think what private equity has done is come in and look like not only could we potentially make money here because we think this is recession resistant, but also we can achieve economies of scale. Like we can roll up these clinics and we can better manage them. We would have the benefit of volume purchasing and things like this. Except if that's the case, any savings that come from that isn't being passed on to the pet owner. I've heard anecdotal evidence from veterinarians that have been in the corporate setting that they feel a lot more pressure to have a higher average transaction cost than they did before they were corporate. So some of them have been there from when the practice was independent to when the owner sold to a corporation. And some of them have left because of that reason, and saying that they're also encouraged to run, to deliver gold standard care, when we know now that gold standard care is not appropriate in every situation, because that is assuming that the person has sort of unlimited means to afford that care. And it's just not the case for most of us. So following a spectrum of care approach generally works better. But these vets, in interviews that I've read and things that I've heard on podcasts and other things that I've read, are saying, why didn't you run that test? And certainly they're discouraged from discounting anything, or they no longer have the power to discount things. They certainly can't give payment plans. We've had clinics that we worked with that were independent and were bought by corporate. Corporate buys them and they terminate working with vet billing, even if their numbers were excellent. We had a hospital administrator argue with corporate buyers about keeping vet billing, because she said, so you're looking at the accounts receivable that we have. This was an emergency and urgent care clinic. And she said, but what you're not seeing is the revenue that we brought in because we were able to treat these pets, and how many more cases we were actually able to take, and how much better my staff feels because we're able to say yes, instead of my client service reps at the front desk coming to me in tears, crying, because they're having to tell people prior to vet billing, oh, well, our policy is if you don't qualify for a care credit or scratch pay, we can't help you. And she said they would come to her and they would feel like they killed that pet if that owner had to choose economic euthanasia. Like they felt personally responsible for that. So everyone on the team was impacted by it. So, and why does corporate, get rid of doing payment plans through vet billing, even though it's efficient because it's outsourced and managed? Mostly it's just because they come in and they say, that is not our policy, without even thinking beyond that. Well, that's not our policy. We don't do payment plans. Okay, why? I mean, you can give me all the reasons that independent clinics have failed with doing their own clinic managed plans. Like, I get that, because they don't have a good system. They do promissory notes. They hold post-dated checks. They send monthly statements. Those are really inefficient ways to get good payment compliance from pet owners, as opposed to outsourcing it, where we do automatic billing, automatic drafting. If a payment fails, we can intervene immediately to resolve that payment, or we can work directly one-on-one with the pet owner to help them get over financial hardship in the midst of their payment plan, all with the goal of keeping them on track with their payments, so the vet is going to get paid, and then everyone feels better about the situation. So, corporate roll-ups are not making it easier for pet owners by they're raising prices, but not also at the same time providing multiple financing options that are accessible to the majority of pet owners, because care credit just isn't cutting it. I mean, I don't mean to just target care credit, but the approval rates on average for care credit are around 40%. Now, they don't publish their approval rates anywhere. That's, trade secret. But that's a number that I've extrapolated by looking at consumer credit reports over the past 5 years. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, publishes a report on consumer credit markets every couple of years. And you can see, approval rates for new lines of credit and different types of credit, like general purpose credit, like your Visa or MasterCard, or specialty medical credit, like Care Credit, Wells Fargo Health Advantage, things like that. So I'm going to extrapolate that, and actually in real life, I anecdotally hear from clinics who see approval rates that are much lower than
Mhm.
40%. Some areas as low as 13%. It depends on the demographics of their
So
area.
if we'll say max 40% of people are getting approved for care credit, why are all these other people getting denied? I mean, is there, it has to be more than just assuming they're financially irresponsible and their credit is trash.
It's a lot more nuanced than that, but the general assumption about why people are declined is that that's the reason, like you've been financially irresponsible. And that also leads to a belief on the part of a lot of vet teams that, like, we don't want to help you because you don't deserve to be helped. Like, you've been financially irresponsible. And I had a practice manager say to me once, well, if Care Credit doesn't want them, we don't either. Like, somehow that makes you not worthy of help. But like in my case, this was the beginning of me learning about creating an alternative to Care Credit. Why was I declined all those years ago when I applied for $4,000? I had no clue, no idea.
Mhm.
Now I know that the reason is I was credit invisible. What that meant is when I applied for that line of credit that night in the emergency hospital, I applied in my own name. Well, I had been married and my credit was all associated with my soon to be ex husband. I had credit cards that said my name on them, but they were under really his account. It was just like the extra card that I got. I
Mhm.
didn't understand how credit worked then. I didn't know anything, which is like sort of embarrassing because I was already in my early 40s by that time. So I didn't know anything about the nuances of credit. I mean, I would venture to say that most people really don't. Like, they don't end up nerding out on this like I did years later to try to understand what actually happened. So it wasn't that I had a poor payment history on anything. It was that they couldn't find one for me.
Mhm.
I didn't have credit in my own name. So what a company like Care Credit is going to do to reduce their risk is say, oh, we don't want to take a chance on this unknown person. So okay, like I understand your algorithm saying that. However, here's why I want vets to be able to still help them and offer them payments. Most likely that client isn't an unknown person to them. That might be a client that they've known for a while or even a
Mhm.
long time. That client might be elderly Mrs. Smith, who they know her husband died 6 months ago.
Mhm.
And now her, 12-year-old poodle needs a procedure that she just doesn't have the money for because she's on Social Security. But
Right.
that clinic, that team knows how much she loves her dog. They know her personal situation. I wanted vets to be able to leverage their knowledge of that relationship and still be able to make the decision to help Mrs. Smith instead of saying, "Oh, Mrs. Smith, we're sorry we can't help you because Care Credit said we can't."
Mhm.
I don't think any vet wants to do that. And
Right.
yet they're put in this position of feeling horrible in this situation. Like, what are we going to do? So maybe
Right.
they would give her a discount. Maybe they would have her do payments, which isn't efficient. But in a lot of cases, they feel that they have to say no
Right.
because the assumption is a denial by Care Credit means something bad about that person, that you're somehow flawed financially. When credit invisibility is a thing, it affects a lot of people
Mhm.
in this country. It disproportionately impacts people of color. So here's another area where we have a problem. So this is a DEI issue, in my opinion, as well.
Mhm.
And it's about socioeconomic bias without even knowing that you're biased. But
Right.
more people of color are credit invisible than white people. Okay. So if we are, and I see the animal welfare movement making greater efforts to embrace adopters of color instead of, there's been a lot of barriers in place for
Mhm.
people of color in adopting animals. So we're becoming cognizant of that and we want to remove those barriers. But they're not going to be the ones that have access to care credit in, a situation of an acute illness or injury. and it's not because they can afford it, and it's not because they have bad credit. A lot of people of color are very distrusting of credit.
Hmm.
There's a long history of redlining and credit denials for these people, so they don't use it.
Hmm.
Um, it's a culturally very different perception. Like, don't we want to be aware of that and sensitive to that, and making sure that we have a mechanism by which we can help those people make payments instead of just assuming that they're not worth us taking a chance on because Care Credit said, well, they're not good enough for their system. And don't even get me onto Care Credit's promotional financing, which too many people misrepresent as being, oh, it's 0% or there's no interest if you pay it within 6 months or 12 months, depending on which option the clinic offers. It is not 0% interest. It is not no interest. It is deferred interest. Okay. So
Hmm.
when you miss a single payment during that time, or you do not pay off your entire balance by the end of your 6 month or 12-month promotional window, then you're going to be hit with retroactive interest of 28.99%. That means that they're going to charge you interest on the entire original balance. It doesn't matter how much you've already paid off so far. They're not charging you interest on your remaining balance. They're charging it on the entire original invoice, which means some people end up owing more than their original bill. And
For
they
the
get,
last 6 months?
yes,
That's bananas.
yes. And okay, so know this, and I know a lot of vet clinics have become more aware of this as well, and that they do take extra time to caution clients that apply for Care Credit in these situations. Say, make sure all of your payments are on time, and make sure that you pay this off in the 6 months. You can't make the monthly payment and pay it off in 6 months. So even though Care Credit is going to send you a bill, it's going to tell you a minimum payment. If that's all you make, if you only make that minimum payment, you're not going to have that balance paid by 6 months, and then you're going to get hit with that interest. So to me, it's also about being cognizant of the impact that these different tools are having on your clients
Hmm.
personally. Like, is that ethical? Do we want to subject people to the risk of, 28.99% interest?
Right.
Um, I guess maybe we feel that we have to, but if we do, at least be aware that that's what's happening out
Right.
there.
Well, I guess for me, I mean, if I were to be on one of these polls, I would probably tell people that I would be more inclined to go to a vet clinic that would offer payment options, even say if you don't need them and you
Mhm.
don't need the payment options, I would be more inclined to go to them and give them my business and my support, because if things changed in the future and something horrible happened and I needed that option, I would know it was there. I mean, forget about these extreme high costs of, like, say, dentals, right? Just your regular basic procedures, vaccines, preventatives, and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I would be more inclined personally to do that. I feel like a lot of other people will. Um, but
We just did a survey through Petsby, which is an app with a lot of like 800,000 pet owner users. And they
mm,
did a survey on this for us. And fully 80% of the people that responded to the survey said that they would have a preference for going to a vet that offered payment plans and payment options. So it's interesting to me the mismatch between the number of pet owners who want options like this versus the number of clinics that actually offer it. It's a huge gulf between the two. Um,
so how does vet billing work then? How do you get to work with these vets, and how do you and like, what's the model? What does it look like?
Yeah, the model is that the vet clinic actually signs up to work with vet billing, because what we're doing is we're allowing the clinic as the business to extend credit to the client as opposed to discounting or writing off services or what have you, which means that they're able to then take a case that they wouldn't otherwise be able to take on. So they sign up with us, and then they log into, we have an entire payment management platform that they log into where they can very easily set up a contract within a few minutes. We encourage them, and we have this in part of our best practices and training, to collect a down payment from the pet owner. We encourage them to try to get 50% and then kind of work from there. And then the rest of the balance comes to vet billing, and we bill them on a recurring basis. So the pet owner and the vet clinic decide on the number of payments that it's reasonable to make for the remaining balance that they owe. And we encourage clinics to make it a comfortable monthly number for them. Like, don't stick to, oh, we can't give you more than 3 months because all the consultants say we shouldn't have AR older than 90 days, but
Hmm.
then their bill is $1,500 and they're paying $500 a month. That's burdensome for people.
Hmm.
So kind of trying to stick to about 10% of a person's net monthly income means it's going to be a reasonable payment. And we see a high correlation to positive repayment rates. If you give too high of payments, that correlates more to defaults or delinquency, or they're missing payments because it's just an additional hardship. So we automatically draft those payments, and then we remit the payments electronically to the vet twice a month. And in the meantime, the pet owner, if there are any issues with making the payment, then we resolve those issues. Like, say a transaction fails. It's not that uncommon for a single transaction to fail for reasons like they got a new card and the expiration date changed, or something like that. Now
Hmm.
imagine a clinic trying to chase that down to
Right.
correct that problem, and having to divert somebody who has another role in patient and client care to try to get that money. So in that case, vet billing is taking that on. In addition, vet billing has software that goes out and looks for changes like this in advance and corrects them, so there's no disruption to the payments. So we have that advantage as well. So
Perfect.
that's, like, as simple as possible. That's really how it works, is we allow them to extend credit, and then we manage those receivables for them to get them the maximum repayment rate so that they are compensated for the services that they are providing.
So you're not burdening that vet then, who, if it's like a one doctor vet, who has all these other things they got to manage, or conversely, a larger hospital with multiple vets with, and burdening, like, say, like the hospital manager, like you guys take care of all that.
Correct. Right. It's
That's
not, there's no additional administrative work for the team. We handle all of it, and we handle all of any customer service related tasks that to do with the payment plan account. Those come to us to resolve, because we don't, the vet team doesn't want to be having discussions about individual payments
right.
with their clients. So we take care of that on their behalf, so that once they click submit on that contract and it comes to us, then we handle everything from there, including if we need to initiate collections activity on someone. But what
Hmm.
we're going to do before we get to that point is work with them to try to resolve it and get the balance paid. But we do have that capability we have an internal collections department, so we can manage all of that for the vet as well. Like, they don't have to hire an additional collections agency to
Sure.
do it. We take care of all of it. And we're going to keep trying to collect that payment for up to 7 years. That's how long legally we're able to pursue it. So unless the clinic says to us, like, oh, we're going to go ahead and write off this account, it's going to stay in our queue and we're going to keep working it. And, it's funny, like, every now and then we have an account that owes a lot of money and that's way past due. And we use multiple methods of outreach to contact pet owners. So it's text messages, it's emails, it's phone calls, it's postal mail. We have many modalities and many ways that make it easy for them to pay us. Like, every text that goes out is a text to pay button. Every email that goes out has a quick pay button. And I remember a case where we had a person that had a huge balance, like $3,000, and they hadn't paid anything toward it for a couple of years. So they stay in that queue of getting the text messages and all those communications. So one day they got that text message, and all of a sudden they paid the entire balance off.
That's
That
crazy.
yeah, so it's like, well, what was maybe happening in the period of time where they obviously they couldn't pay it, but it might have still been on their mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to resolve this. And two
Yeah.
years later, they paid the entire thing. And I ran into a lady at Walmart. I don't know if you saw that thing I posted on LinkedIn. I wrote about it, that had two dogs with her, um, in a stroller, a Pomeranian and a Yorkie, and they were so cute. And I'm a dog nut, so I had to stop and talk to her. And I ended up talking to her for a long time about her life journey with her pets and how one of her animals had to get emergency care.
Mm-hmm.
She had to go in the hospital herself at around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And the vet that she had always been going to knew the situation. And while she was in the hospital, her vet paid the $1,200 emergency vet bill. The vet never said anything to her about it, but obviously she knew.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this lady won't go back there because she is so ashamed that the vet did this kindness. So this speaks to how much baggage we all have around money and
Yeah.
responsibility, right?
Yeah.
I thought this was so eye-opening because she said to me, I was taught that I have to be responsible for these things, like that I shouldn't accept help for this. And she said, I can't face her because she did this. And we chatted a little bit about why I encouraged her to go back, and that, you know, her vet wouldn't have done this if she didn't want to do it and she
Yeah.
didn't say anything to her about it. But that is also what keeps people from going to the vet. If they're afraid that they can't pay, they feel it's absolutely their responsibility and they should be able to pay. And we need to be aware that people are carrying this stuff around with them,
Yeah.
and they sometimes have weird attitudes about money, and they don't want to ask for help, which is why we need to invite them into a space where they feel okay to ask for help or to bring up that, you know, this feels uncomfortable for their budget, well, whatever it is. And if they meet an empathic, supportive response, then they're going to open up
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be able to collaboratively problem solve.
Well, if anybody wants to find out more about vet billing, do you have a website that they can go to?
We do, and it's really easy to find because it's just vetbilling.com. So they can visit our website. We also, you can follow us on social media and learn about us there. We are on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can meet our team and our social media and meet our animals that we all live and die for and eat ramen noodles for so that we can have them. But you can learn some more of the behind the scenes stuff about us and read about some of the wonderful success stories we have. That we get letters from pet owners all the time, that are so grateful that their vet offered them this option, and they kind of bring all of us to tears because our whole small team is really, we're really in a mission oriented type of thing. This feels much more like a mission and a movement to us than a business. I mean, it is a business,
Yeah.
but for me, more than anything, more than getting the focus on vet billing and having more vets use us, although I would love that. I feel like every clinic should partner with vet billing. But more than that, I want to change the narrative and the beliefs that we have around people with financial challenges, and understand that people cycle through in the lifetime of a pet, which could be 10 to 15 years. People cycle through phases where they have maybe more money or they have less money or they have a setback, and that there's always a story there, and that story isn't every time, well, this person is financially responsible or they're a neglectful pet parent. They're a person with a story, and we're not always privy to those details. But if we meet everyone with kindness and empathy and a willingness to help, it makes it better for all of us. We're so much happier and more fulfilled when we're able to help. One of the things we say in the demos that we give to our clinics is we want you to feel the joy of saying yes, because that is really joyful. Everyone feels terrible when they say no, and everyone in that transaction suffers, the pet, the client, and the veterinary professional.
Well, Suzanne, I honestly feel like we could talk about this for the entire rest of the day, but
We're gonna
um,
have a lot of editing to do. I'm so sorry.
no, I think this was great. Look, I want to say thank you very much for coming on and for and taking the time to talk with me and educate me as much as whoever is watching this. I think there was so many good points to this. It was a really good discussion, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for sending me questions and stats and being so well prepared. And it was wonderful to talk to you. And I'm glad I finally get to kind of see you in person instead of just on LinkedIn. And I hope we'll maintain this connection because I think we're kind of soul sisters on this topic.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
we all need to stick together, those of us that are really committed to improving access to care. So thank you for inviting me. I really
You're
appreciate it.
And just as a quick thanks to all of our viewers for tuning into the AWIP podcast, you can find all of our information and our videos on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. So thanks for tuning in and helping us make a more humane world.